Hello there. I thought today I'd do a bit of a blog, vlog, whatever, video on rules because we've got a new-ish edition coming in soon. They've hinted at, in fact, I should probably get that. I covered this article the other day, but I think probably needs to be discussed in a bit more, with a bit more depth. That's the one, isn't it? So, what are the things that they've said they're going to change? And essentially, this is a bit of a wish list. So, comment down below what rules you think should change and what issues you have with them. Yeah, I'd be really interested to see your comments. I really like the debate down in the comment section. So, pop something down there. Didn't they say something? Oh no, it wasn't in this, was it? It was another video that somebody else did, and they've leaked a message from somebody who purports to be inside the rules writing team, and has some ideas as to what they're going to do. One of them was something to do with infantry, but yeah, that was me just asking ChatGPT to try and find me a load of articles to go through. It's not a lot, really. People mostly do videos on Warhammer, not blogs. Anyway, so there's several rules that I think are worthwhile discussing. The first one that I wanted to talk about is I think is the biggest challenge at the moment is Swift Stride. It is a bit of an issue because it allows you to essentially. So the problem is that you've got lots of really fast units like cavalry and flying monsters and stuff like that, and Swift Stride means that they just get longer charges than usual. And what that's done is that's increased the power disparity between infantry and cavalry. So your average cavalry unit has movement: heavy cavalry 7, normal cavalry 8, fast cavalry usually 9. I think Slanesh Seekers have movement 10, but that's your normal move characteristic. 7, 8, 9, 10. That's 7 or 8 is pretty standard. Obviously Pegasus Knights have fly 10, I think, so they're movement 10 too. So very fast units in comparison to infantry, which typically has a movement of like 4 or 5, or sometimes for dwarves 3. Their maximum charge is 6, and they get to roll 2 dice and pick the highest, right? So that's Games Workshop. That kind of pick the highest mechanic is Games Workshop trying to essentially make your charges a bit more reliable. So essentially, if it was just always roll just 1d6, for instance, then you would end up with with you know people rolling lots of ones and a negative play experience, basically. So I bet they tested it. 1d6 didn't work because most charges didn't go off, and so they introduced this mechanic that made charges a bit more reliable. What they've then done is add in this Swift Stride rule, which has made charges for fast units even more reliable and even more reliably long distance. And therein lies the crux of the issue with Swift Stride, in that essentially you've got a unit of cavalry, which let's say average movement 8, versus infantry, average movement 4. They've already got a 4-inch advantage in terms of charge distance. You then add probably. So rather than 2 dice pick the highest, you're probably going to get. I think your average charge distance is 4 point something. So 4 point. I want to say 4.4, but 4.6 is in my head as well. Anyway, it's just over 4 basically is your average charge distance with 2 dice. Pick the highest. So you're averaging 4. So your infantry unit is averaging essentially a charge distance of, like, let's say the average charge movement is 4, the average charge distance is 4 or 5, so your charge range for an infantry unit is sort of 8 or 9 inches, right? Your average charge distance for a cavalry unit, on the other hand, is their, let's say, average 8, plus the average of about 8.2, I think it is, for Swift Stride. So you're actually quite likely to get a 9. It's not more likely than not, but it's pretty significant. So you've got essentially an average charge range of about 16 inches with cavalry, 16, 17 inches with cavalry, compared to 8 or 9 with infantry. So there's a huge gulf between the two, and cavalry can pretty much guarantee getting the charge off against infantry. You then compound that with first charge, which a lot of cavalry units have, and I would say it doesn't make sense for them to. So a lot of the rule set in the old world has actually come from Warhammer Historical, which I used to play. I've got the book somewhere. I don't know where, but I've got the book somewhere. And a lot of the rules in that were developed for Warhammer Ancient Battles is what it was called. Warhammer Ancient Battles. A lot of those rules that were developed for WAB were based on some kind of sense of trying to make it feel a bit more like what actually happened historically. So, for instance, the drilled rule was invented for Romans, because one of the cool things that the Roman infantry were able to do, because of all their training, was essentially move very quickly from one formation to another, and in actual fact to have multiple formations in their kit bag, as it were. So when coming up against, for instance, a shield wall, they could also adopt a shield wall, but then when coming up against chariots, they formed these kind of formations that funneled chariots essentially in between blocks of people, so the chariots didn't impact the people. They could also, later on, swiftly form a testudo, which made them, I say swiftly, it still took quite a while. A testudo isn't as quick as in films. It takes a lot longer than that. But anyway, you could form up into a testudo, and that made you pretty much impenetrable to small arms fire, like archery and that kind of stuff. Javelins could still poke through shields, but bows, not so much. Bows at the time, anyway. The longbow, and the bodkin arrow hadn't quite been invented. By the way, the longbow and the bodkin arrow doesn't penetrate full plate steel. It does penetrate a wooden shield, though. So, one of the things that it did to debilitate people was shoot them in the arm and pin the shield to the arm, which I'd imagine was quite painful and meant every time that person blocked a blow with a shield, it drove the arrow head into the arm, because you can't really take it out, because it's you have to wait for the battle to finish to pull the shield off and then push the arrow through. So all pretty horrible. Anyway, so drilled was invented for essentially the Romans. I think the stubborn rule was invented for the Romans as well, because again, they were because of how good they were at essentially manoeuvring on the battlefield, which was their main advantage until other armies worked out how to professionalize a little bit more and then started to counter these tactics. They were able to essentially just fall back from because the thing is, and war doesn't look like Braveheart or Troy or any of those films, sadly, where you get these massed ranks of people just charging at each other in this big mess. That's not what happened. People essentially would run up to the battle line and then form a shield wall there, and then essentially start a game of shoving. And essentially it would be the side that shoved over the other shield wall that won, because once you got them off their feet, you could stab them when they're on the ground. And there was, obviously a bit of stabbing in the shield wall, but that usually wasn't tremendously deadly. What was deadly was getting pushed back and getting pushed over and having to essentially, turn and face and, show your back to the enemy, which was a lethal mistake. So Stubborn was an attempt to kind of give the Romans the ability to, when they're losing ground in combat, they can just, fall back quickly and then regroup, and then a new combat is formed on their terms, a few yards back, which would then force the enemy to essentially enemy shield wall to stumble over the row of corpses, because essentially if you've got two shield walls, you end up with a row of corpses at the shield wall, and people trip over it. So if you can fall back quickly, they can trip over, and that then disorders them, so then you can hit them. The Romans were very, very effective at all of these tactics. It's not just the armor and how rich the Roman Empire actually was. It's actually how effective those troops were, and essentially the Aurelian reforms were not only in terms of getting rid of Hastati and Triarii and all those and replacing them with essentially cohorts, but it was also essentially the skills that the legionary cohorts were expected to be able to have. So on the battlefield, they were super, super effective. And in fact, you could argue that one of the downfalls of Rome was that they kind of abandoned this and went more towards more auxilia, which were essentially just normal troops. They didn't have the same level of skill, of battlefield skill. So the Romans were excellent at what we call in rugby game management. They were really, really good at that, and that's how they won battles. They knew. Yeah, they were just really good at that. And so a lot of these rules come from Warhammer Historical, Warhammer Ancient Battles. I don't think Swift Stride was in that. To me, I think Swift Stride's been applied badly. And I think that they won't do this. But what it should be is like an ability for quick infantry units to get more reliable charges at a longer range. The cavalry already have like a 4-inch charge advantage because of their move. They don't need any more of an advantage, right? They seriously don't need any more of an. Swift Stride basically just makes charges super, super reliable. What I'd like to see as a fix is it just being +1 to charge. That'll do. Plus one to charge. That's absolutely fine in my book. There's lots of other bonuses to charge. That would essentially make stuff like the wire spell that adds D3 to your charge, distance and reach, would make that more powerful than it currently is. I accept that. I think that would be quite cool and quite flavourful, really, because orcs headlong charging into things. So either I'd like it depowered or I'd like it to come at a cost. And that cost being that if you're charging like headlong into combat without any care for your formation or whatever, when you use Swift Stride to make a charge, you A, make a disordered charge or something, and B, you're +1 to hit because you're less concerned about safety and you're just going headlong into them. So it's a choice. It's a genuine choice as to whether to use it. I think that would make it a bit more interactive. However, would increase complexity, and the game's complex enough. What I think it should have been is to power up units like, for instance, Slayers and Dark Elf Witches and let's say War Dancers and certain Forsaken and certain infantry units that are unnaturally quick. So what that would do is, say for instance, your average Witch Elf unit has a charge distance of like 9-10 inches, right? There's movement 5 plus 4 or 5, 9 or 10 inches on average. Again, your average cavalry unit, if it didn't have Swift Stride, would be like 12, 13. Now, if you then added Swift Stride to that, then you would end up with the Witches being like 13, 14. So actually the Witches charging threat range would be more or less the same as cavalry, which I think would add a pretty... So cavalry are still quicker in terms of being able to manoeuvre them around the table and get them into position to make a charge, absolutely. like a 16-inch or a 14-inch march is way better than an 8-inch march. So cavalry still rule the field in terms of maneuverability, but if you took Swift Stride off them and then gave it to certain like what are thematically really quick infantry units to essentially power them up, then I think that rule would have been interestingly applied. However, that's not what they've done. Okay, so that's Swift Stride. I think, given the fact that they're not very good at admitting they made mistakes in rules, I think, and given that they're not going to do an entire rewrite of the whole thing to get rid of Swift Stride from all cavalry and flying monsters and stuff, and then reallocate it to quick infantry units, which I think would be a far superior solution, what I hope they do, and I think they'll probably do nothing about Swift Stride, but what I hope they do is make it just a simple +1 to charge range and roll. I'd be happy with that as a change. And, I think rather than powering up infantry to make them better able to meet cavalry, we need to depower cavalry and try and make the game a little bit more simple by taking out some rules that currently benefit cavalry, or by depowering those rules such that the cavalry don't have the advantage that they currently do. So depowering cavalry is what I'd like to see. I think what they'll end up doing is they'll probably end up just increasing. Power creep has always been a thing with GW. What they'll end up doing is increasing how powerful infantry are and slightly breaking the game in that direction, maybe. Although, actually, looking at the Arcane Journals, they've been really good at writing rules for quite a long time, actually. There's a lot of super balanced factions in there. So, yeah. I'm hopeful, actually, that they do a decent job. But anyway, back to Swift Stride. That's what I'd like to see. And that's what I think they'll probably end up doing, if anything. Right, what is next on my list? Stomp, Thunder Stomp. Was that in one of these articles? In fact, I'm just going to go through this article on Bell of Lost Souls. This is from September of 2024. So it's a very old article talking about rules, but there's still problems. So one of the problems that they have is spam. Now, you can't stop this. There is talk somewhere that they're going to redress the problem with army building a bit. I mean, I really don't know how they're going to do that. So what's the problem? The problem is some factions have some really good units that are great as MSU. When I say MSU, I mean multiple small units. Sometimes minimum size units is what the acronym stands for, and sometimes people think it stands for maximum size units, although it doesn't. Multiple small units is basically what MSU stands for. And it describes a tactic of taking. So let's say, for instance, you're a Lathern player. You're writing a list. You quite like Shadow Warriors, and you want to have a Shadow Warrior heavy force. Shadow Warriors are core. They come in units of 5. They are 70 points, I think, for 5, and a third of your army, so 660 points. So 70. You could take 10 units of them, so that's 50 in units of 5. That represents a bit of a problem for game balance because essentially you've got lots of small units of skirmishers that you can essentially put on the table on a checkerboard pattern, and then lots of shooting stuff, and your opponent doesn't really have enough turns to get through the 10 units of skirmishers and then hit your... so you've lost 700 points of your army, probably. That's because they can scout as well, so you can deploy them all over the board, basically, and just basically clag up the board with your semi-useless scouting skirmishers, and then your opponent has to wade through all those before they get to the heart of your army. Now, and by the time they've got to the heart of your army, they've actually been a bit depleted by the Shadow Warriors will have done some damage, but also occasionally units will be out in the open without a target to charge at, and then you can shoot the ever-living snot out of them. MSU is a bit of a problem. Some tournaments have inelegantly, I'm not saying that this isn't effective, I'm saying it's not elegant, have inelegantly applied a sort of a crude 6-unit cap for core, 3-unit cap for other stuff. I'm not in favour of that. I think there should be a better solution. And realistically, I think the things that you want to spam should be rarer. It's quite simple. We already have core, special, rare, right? So if there's something that you really want to spam, don't let it be spammed. Put it in rare. So, for instance, with dwarves, like gyrocopter scam, well, sort of. Gyrocopter spam is a thing, and part of the problem is with the expeditionary force, you can take 2 scout helicopters as a core choice. Now, there are other limits that we have as well, like 0 to 1 per 1,000. You could do that on the scouts. You could do it on scout helicopters, 0 to 1 per 1,000 points. That's a good way of essentially allowing them to spend their core tax on something that's actually quite effective and works within the list, but also limits them. And again, it's not a very elegant solution. And then, of course, you've got gyrocopters as special, which means in that list you can spend 1,000 points on them. Well, just make your gyrocopters rare. Like, I know that feels slightly wrong, but like 500 points of gyrocopters is enough of a hold on, enough of a problem. I mean, would it be? Have I got one? No. Let's go. I'm still getting to grips with this. Army builder, so bear with. Oh, okay. For some reason it's got. So we've got scout gyrocopters, and yeah, 60 points for gyrocopters. Plus of course you've got brimstone gun, clatter gun. Let's go clatter gun. So 70 points again for. So with your 500 points of rare, how many of these could you get? You could get 5. 6. Yeah, that'd be 420. No, 7. Yeah, 490. Idiot. 7 squared is 49, which is one less than 50. But I did that in my head, and I went 49 is more than 500. Not enough coffee, clearly. More caffeine and nicotine required. Right. Anyway, you could have 7 of them, which is still a lot and still a bit of a problem. But it does then stop you taking any other rare stuff in the expeditionary force. And of course, you're probably going to want gyrocopters over gyrobombers because they are better. I wish gyrobombers were better, because they're so cool. You probably don't want to buy flame cannons anyway. You probably do want to buy organ guns though. And also this kind of, there are also restrictions within armies already. So I don't see any problem actually with an expeditionary force having 4 organ guns as all their rare choices. Artillery are great, but they do come with pretty significant drawbacks sometimes. I'd be in favour of stuff that you could spam that you don't really want to be spammed. Either put these kind of unit caps on them, so gyrocopters, I don't know, make them 0 to 2 per 1,000 points or something like that, if that's what you want to do with those particular units, or make them rarer. So for instance, scout gyrocopters could become special and you see less of them because they're not taking up a core tax. So you could make gyrocopters rare. So there are ways of dealing with this without just saying, just a maximum of 3 of any unit. I think we need to be a lot more mindful of which units are spammable, and because we don't want to stop people from taking like for instance that Shadow Warrior list. I actually wouldn't have a problem with facing that. I think that'd be quite cool and actually quite thematic because that's how Shadow Warriors operate. They sort of hide in the shadows and do weird stuff, and they're a bit annoying. They're a bit like wood elves. So I'd enjoy playing against that list, I think. Although it's designed as a negative play experience, I think it would represent a decent challenge. So anyway, That's I can't remember what I was supposed to be talking about there, actually. Oh, yeah, we're going through this thing. Yeah. So spam's a bit of a problem. Magic spam is more of a problem because if you can, spam out a lot of magic, then you can do a lot of damage with a lot of magic. It's not like, was it sixth edition? Ooh. Hello. It's not like, was it sixth edition where it was like, magic was, oh, it was eighth, wasn't it? Because end times. Yeah, yeah. I didn't actually play eighth, but I read the rules. I just didn't have any models and time, so I just read it. Anyway, but the magic spells in eighth, I am from reading the rules, they look pretty nuts, and I'm given to understand they were actually pretty nuts on the tabletop. So one spell could win you a game, pretty much. Some spells in the old world can sort of edge it, but I don't think there's anything that you cast a spell you win a game. I don't think there's anything. What was it the High Elves had? Was it their old version of Drain Magic? It was just like kill everything, sort of. Anyway, so magic spam is a bit of a problem. If you do magic spam, it is a bit like eighth in that you've got all of this stuff that your opponent really can't do an awful lot about. And you're increasing your odds of casting a miscast, but you're also increasing your odds of them being outclassed in the arts as well. So imagine them being outclassed in the arts with like their second dispel, they roll result of 8 or something, which is nobody can ever make a dispel for the rest of the turn, and then you've got all turn left to just spam magic at them. Absolutely, horrendous. Ridden mounts are a big problem. Why? Ridden mounts are a big problem because the rider can take shitloads of really cool stuff that makes what is ostensibly a really interesting mount into like either this super tanky, unkillable thing, or this magnificent death dealer that nothing can stand against. And there are so many permutations and so many. So, for instance, like the big one is you take a wizard, you give it a massive sword of some description, ogre blade probably, if you haven't got one in your faction lore that's better. You give that mage illusion. You maybe go for a lore familiar. You pick spectral doppelganger. You charge it into combat. You get 2d6 hits with a nuts weapon, and then you get d6 thunder stomps at the end, which automatically hit at a high strength and a high AP. So you basically got 3d6 high strength, high AP hits on that particular ridden mount. So like, which is pretty crazy really when you think it through and you add it all up. Or alternately, you can give the thing like a 2-up save, 5-up ward, 5-up regen, and possibly the ability to heal itself some wounds over the game as well, if you really want. That is also, with 8 wounds and toughness 6, that thing's just not going to die. You're going to have to essentially get rid of it by combat resing it off the table. Which I have done with dragons on several occasions. But that's really the only way that you're gonna get them. Locking it in a challenge and then combat resing it off is a bit of a problem. Right. But then again, there is a mechanic to defeat that, and that is when it charges your unit, challenge it out. The problem is that you don't have infinite challenges. That works for like one turn. And so if they only get the 1 wound if they only get the 6 wounds damage points that they need, which is the 1 wound to kill the champion and the 5 wounds overkill. So you get 6 for combat res in total. If you've got 2 ranks and a banner, you've still lost by 3. So, maybe you've got 3 ranks because you've got Horde. Maybe you've got a war banner. Maybe you've got the BSB in there as well. So if you've got all of that, you end up drawing. Oh, and the musician breaks the tie. Hooray. So they end up losing by a technical -1. Which is, not going to break a leadership 10 high elf prince on a unkillable dragon, is it? So you're going to have to win combat by a significant margin. So yeah, it's just they're just super difficult to deal with. What would be my solution? One of the problems that I have is with Stomp and Thunderstomp. I think it's too reliable. I think that's a bit of an issue, particularly with well, it's a bit of an issue with all monsters really, because it is just too reliable. Like you get D6 automatic hits if you're a big thing at AP2, which is pretty nasty, and they're at strength, user. So usually strength 5, 6, 7, something like that. So high strength, high AP, automatic D6 automatic hits. I think they should roll to hit. Controversial opinion, I know, but I think those Thunderstomps should roll to hit, or I don't know, they hit on a 4-up or something, or just halve them, halve the automatic hits. So where it was a D6, make it a D3. Where it was a D3, make it like 2, and where it was 2, make it 1, and keep 1 as 1. And then I think we end up with a stomp profile that isn't totally broken. The thing, well, if you do that though, you basically get rid of giants, because giants are fun. They have cool fun effects that you have to randomly roll for. So I love that bit of interaction with the giants, like random effects table. Same with the troll hag one, motherly love, I think that's called. They're just brilliant, thematically. But then you get your D6 stomps at the end to actually do the proper damage, probably. If you reduce the giant stomps from D6 to D3, would you take it? I don't know. I think the real issue, I think stomp is a bit. Some monsters, I think stomp is pointed for appropriately, and some monsters it really isn't. So. And I don't think that all large things should have a shitload of stomp attacks. Like every single dragon seems to have D6, D6 plus 1, blah 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 blah. Like I don't get that with dragons. I don't, dragons aren't that stompy. Like it's not like a giant. I can understand a giant having D6, absolutely. But a dragon, I don't know. They don't feel as stompy as a giant for some reason. I don't know whether that's just me, but whatever. I don't know. I don't really even know what I'm talking about anymore at the moment. But I think the stomp's too reliable. But I also think if you get rid of it, then a lot of monsters become unplayable. So is the problem really with stomp or thunderstomp? Again, comment down below what you think. I'm not sure. But I know that some people think it's an issue. I think the real issue is ridden monsters. They are a bit of a problem. There are some unridden monsters like Necrosphinx who are totally broken, but they just need to be more expensive. Basically, I don't have any problem with the Necrosphinx rules thematically. Absolutely makes sense, but they're just too cheap, way too cheap. So I guess what I'm saying is some things need repointing, and to be honest, actually, I don't really want to change the rules around ridden monsters. I just think they probably just should be a little bit more expensive. He says after having spent ages trying to convert a Nurgle dragon, and I'm nearly there. But still, I think they should just probably be a little bit more expensive. I weirdly don't think the Chaos one is too expensive, because you can't. It's really difficult in Chaos to get up to a 2-up save. And I think there is a massive difference between a 2-up and a 3-up save. I think 3-up, 5-up, 5-up is nowhere near as bad as 2-up, 5-up, 5-up. I think there's quite a big difference in terms of the outcomes that you get. So, for instance, if you hit with an AP2 attack, you go from a 3rd saving to a half saving, and that's quite a big difference actually. I know it feels like it's only an extra 1 in 6, but again, if you spike it and swing it, then the better save, swinging it means, even more saved. So it's on those kind of extreme dice rolls where that little bit of an advantage takes has a huge impact. And the thing is, although statistically these dice rolls are really super unlikely, they happen all the time. So you really do have to expect anything from the dice in a game. I mean, you can't expect every roll to fail, because that just doesn't happen most of the time. And if that, you can't go into any kind of situation with that as your expectation, but you've got to expect some bad dice, right? You've got to expect below average dice when calculating, should I charge that unit into there or not? And if I get below average dice, do I still win? That's the calculation really, or should be. But yeah, so there's big swingy rolls. They do happen very frequently. They're less likely than statistics would like you to think. But Drigon mounts. What to do with them? Don't know. I think just increase the points. Ranked infantry isn't good. No, it's not. It's really not. I don't want. So this is something that ranked just isn't any good. It's not worth taking. Have almost not been worth taking. Yeah, I mean, I'd agree. There's Chaos Warriors. I took them once because I like the models and I like the idea of them, but they were just rubbish. Just didn't do anything. They didn't get into combat quickly enough. They weren't tough enough. Even toughness 4 up save, you'd have thought would be no, they weren't tough enough against shooting. They didn't really get into combat quickly enough because shooting. Because I mean, this is the thing, right? So if you're like a unit of 12 Chaos Warriors and you've got a unit of, let's say, 30 archers, right? And you're starting 24 inches apart. They get a round of shooting. Turn 1, you get to move, close the distance to 16. They get a round of shooting again. You close to 8. They get a round of shooting again. You charge. They get a stand and shoot reaction, and that's. So their first turn, 2. So it's 4 turns before you can. Is that right? Shoot, move, charge, another shoot. Yeah. So it's 3 turns basically before your infantry. That's with chaos with no movement shenanigans can get into that unit of archers. By the time it gets there, the archers aren't going to have killed that many, but even with 20 odd shooting a turn, 10 hitting, 3 wounding, no AP, 2 die. So let's say 2 die every time there's a round of shooting. So by the time you get there, you've only got 6 left, who only have 1 attack each. So 7 attacks hitting on 3s, 4 hit, wound on 3s, 3 wound, on average. So that's 3 dead. And then you've got probably 12 attacking back, hit on 4s, 6, 2 wound, 1 fail. So 2 dead archers. So archers down to 28 and Chaos Warriors are down to 5 after 1 round of combat. And every other round of combat, a warrior of chaos is going to die. So by the end of the battle, you might get the unit of archers down to about 20, and your chaos warriors will be dead. Statistically average, that is. So, realistically, infantry are crap compared with ranged weapons, and certainly when compared with cavalry. Now, I'm not saying we should make infantry better. I don't like rules bloat. However, I think shields should be way more important than they are, and I think shields in combat and when on foot should give an additional +1 to save, shooting and combat. I think that shield wall effect should be way more effective. And yes, that means Iron Breakers and Chaos Chosen getting a 2-up save. I'm perfectly fine with that. Chaos Warriors having a 3-up save in combat, perfectly fine with that. I also think you need to change the rules of a thrusting spear such that it adds more than 1 to your initiative when charged in the front. In fact, to an extent, I'd give it strike first. Against a unit that has charged it in the front. Perhaps. I don't know. Something like that. I wouldn't give it the, like, you make your enemy strike last, because essentially your high elf prince is still then striking first, so that's not really the point. But I see. I hope you see my point. Flails are pretty. I just think we need to like examine how weapons are used on horseback and on foot. I quite like throwing spears. I'd like to see more throwing spears in the game. They're pretty cool. They give you fighting extra rank when you charge, which I think is pretty cool. But not a lot of units have throwing spears for some reason. Thrusting spears, I think, should be improved in something like that. Like, I don't know, maybe it gives you D3 initiative bonus, or maybe it doubles your initiative, or maybe it just gives you strike first. I don't know, but thrusting spears should have a lot more poke, quite literally. I've heard people suggest that they should get +1 to wound against charges. I mean, yeah, I guess that's. But I think it should be more about the fact that they strike first, or that they're more likely to get the first attack off, because you've got to get past the tip of the spear to kill the chap wielding it. So, yeah, rather than make them more deadly against chargers, I think they should just be quicker against chargers, which is what they've tried to do by giving them +1 initiative, but I just think that bonus needs to be more. And shields in combat need to be better, because, you know, why would you take shields over great weapons? Of course, everybody's going to go great weapons because you get +2 strength, -2 AP. Sorry, you get 2 AP, +2 strength. Yes, you're striking last, but you probably are anyway, because you're probably getting charged by cavalry. So you take great weapons because it's, you know, if you take a shield, you go from like so say for instance you're a dwarf warrior, you go for a shield against a lance, their armor bane hits, you're not saving. So if you go with, so let's say you're a dwarf, you've got heavy armor, shield, and a great weapon. You've got charged by cavalry. Oh, quelle surprise! That's never happened before. They're hitting you with lances, so they're AP2. Do you choose to have +2 strength and 2 AP, but no armor save, or no AP? Oh no, they do, because they got Gromwell weapon. Sorry, 1 AP. So, do you choose to have Strength 5 AP2 hits, or Strength 3 AP1 hits and a 6-up save? You go for the great weapon every time. Strength 5 AP2 hits, because you're striking initiative step. It's the same thing. It's not an initiative. The great weapons having always strike last is not actually a penalty in most circumstances, because you're already going second behind the person who's charged you, right? That's why you give great weapons to these units, because they're typically low initiative anyway. So you don't really suffer from any initiative penalty. Like, you get trolls have initiative too. Give them great weapons because they've lost 1 initiative for +2 strength and AP2. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's so much. Why would you do anything other? I do think there needs to be a bit of clarifying as to what, like, strikes last and initiative modifiers and all the rest, how they all stack, because that's not particularly clear. Like, for instance, if you're Slanesh or High Elves or whatever, you know, do you essentially strike with a great weapon at initiative 2 because you're +1 initiative? Because you do get your charge bonuses with great weapons, so do you get other bonuses as well? Or does that enhancement happen before it's set to 1? That needs clarifying. I mean, I always play that it doesn't. You're initiative 1 to begin with, so whatever's on your war script, whatever's on your, you know, your profile, that becomes initiative 1, and then you apply modifiers to that. That's how I play it, but because that to me makes the most sense. Of course, high elves with great weapons strike before other people with great weapons. Like, that just makes sense to me. Anyway, but ranked infantry isn't good. But thankfully, there is a lot we can do to power up infantry. I am not a massive fan of powering up infantry. These guys, for instance, like, such cool models, but they're just shit because ranked infantry is terrible. Skirmishers. 360 line of sight charge, super mobility kind of has you playing a different game. Yeah, I. In short, they're complicated, obtuse, and don't really work. A ton of unanswered questions about how they work. What happens when you multi-charge skirmishes? Do they have flanks in combat? How does all the... So, I mean, this is an old article. Some of these have been answered. What happens when you multi-charge skirmishes? Basically, the charging player moves one unit, and then the second charge is like done up to that unit. And if that means that charge fails, then it fails, right? But it's down to the charging player to determine the order, so it's up to them to make sure that they don't have a failed charge. So don't charge the one that if the unit clumps onto that one as it should, then the other unit fails, obviously. Do they have flanks in combat? No, of course they don't. They don't have flanks, they don't have a formation. How does all the movement really work? I don't get that comment, really. And over every question we had to call the judge for in 5 games revolved. Over every question we had to call the judge for, in 5 games. At Nova over 5 games, every question we had to call a TO for involved the skirmishing rule. I think what they mean. Every day I see a line of people online asking questions about how they work. Yeah, you do. Yeah, the rules around skirmishing is complicated, and that's because it's a rank and flank game that's trying to allow for a bit of skirmishing in there. Personally, I'd be in favour of some kind of preset skirmish formation, but I'd also be in favour of taking the skirmish keyword off Pegasus Knights. Like, they should fight in a lance or open order. It's up to them, but I think putting them in skirmish just makes them way too good. They've already got tons of advantages. They don't need to skirmish. And actually, it's not very thematic either, because, like, why on earth would they be able to turn on a dime? Like, look at the size of the bloody things. Like, they're absolutely massive. Even if you look at massive birds, right, it takes them... They can't just turn on a dime, and they sort of have to wheel around in the air. So, I don't see why these guys get to... They can't hover. I mean, look at the size of them. They clearly can't hover. So, I mean, they can in Warhammer 3, but that's because flying units are required to hover. But, you know, they clearly can't. So they should have some kind of turning circle and limited visibility and blah, 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 blah. So I don't like these guys skirmishing at all. I think these guys skirmishing is the thing that makes them game breaking. And if you got rid of skirmish, I think you'd see less of them. And you might see a few more Grail Knights. You wouldn't see questing Knights because they're still crap. But, you know, whatever. Would I get rid of the initiative penalty on great weapons? Yeah, I don't know. I think weapons should work differently on foot and mounted. Like, for instance, you know, a lot of these double-handed swords that you see, like the massive German, you know, double-handed swords, the Zweihänder, the huge sort of 8-9 foot swords, they're actually used on horseback and more like big metal lances than like big cleaving swords. Because if you're in ranks, right, and you've got 2 horses either side, you can't go swirling this massive sword or a huge weapon around because you're going to hit the guys. So you have to do that kind of linear style attack and hit the enemy with the body of your horse, and your lance is like a secondary thing. But actually breaking their formation with the body of your horse is the most important thing to do. So the rules should kind of reflect that a little bit. Should all cavalry, instead of having a mount attack, just do impact hits at the strength of the mount? I think so. But anyway. Giving ground, fall back in good order. Some feel this neuters decisive combat results and adds bloat to combat resolution in that it's too forgiving. I don't. I disagree. I think if you've fallen back in good order and you pursue into that combat, it's not a fresh combat. I think it should be the same combat. If you've decided to follow up into a fallback in good order, I think that should be counted as a follow-up. You still got to roll for it, but it's still the same as a 2-inch follow-up. So it's the same combat and it's a follow-up. I think that would neuter a lot of cavalry's strengths as well. Personally, I do think cavalry are too flimsy. Like, I think some elite cavalry should be given more wounds. Like, for instance, Grail Knights, Blood Knights, Chosen Knights, for actually very few extra points, because I don't think it would make them way more powerful. Just them having like an extra wound or something. But then again, that might be game breaking, and I can't see Games Workshop doing that. They do have a pretty decent staying power because they've got a 2-up save against shooting, obviously. That doesn't always help. So, giving ground fallback. I do like the fallback in good order mechanic. That's come from Warhammer Ancient Battles, I think, if I remember rightly. And I really like it as like adding like an extra, like you don't just break a unit and then charge it down and destroy it. Actually, you can lose a round of combat and survive and just fall back. It's also a really good mechanic for like panics, so that if you're at basically full strength and your unit's got a bit jittery, it kind of falls back a little bit, but then sorts itself out, which feels a bit fairer. Obviously, if you fail a panic test and you're below half strength, that doesn't happen. You flee as normal. But if you're over half strength, you just fall back in good order, which I think makes way more sense. So I actually like falling back in good order and giving ground. I like that nuance. I think that's good. For a rank and flank game, I think that's necessary. I think the old just you flee and die rubbish, just for losing a round of combat and failing a leadership test seems a bit much. Impact hits. Abusable targeting. In challenges, they always hit the challenge character even if it's not realistic, e.g. rear charges. Yeah, I mean, I think impact hits and stomps ought to be not conducted at initiative steps. I think that's part of the problem. I think impact hits should be, when that unit's combat is chosen at step 1.1 of the combat rules, then impact hits apply at that stage. Everybody's impact hits apply simultaneously, and I think it should be at that stage that impact hits apply, so they you can charge a unit, you can hit the unit with your chariot, and then you can get challenged out. So that's what I'd like to see, which would probably see more chariots on the table, which I'm all in favour of. I quite like chariots. I don't think stomps should be able to target somebody in a challenge, to be honest. I think that doesn't... Well, actually, it does make sense, doesn't it? It doesn't make sense against other monsters, but it does make sense against... Yeah, I don't know. Impact hits certainly not, though, because that just doesn't make any real, because you hit the unit, right? But I think that's a bit of a problem. Skirmishes we talked about. Miscast table, excessively punishing. Apparently there's a few comments online that says that miscasts are horrible and they destroy... swings and roundabouts, isn't it? It's a dice game, baby. Sometimes things don't work out. And if you've really lent heavily into Magic, that's one of the downsides of Magic. Yeah, that's one of the downsides of Magic. It occasionally goes wrong and stops you from using it. And when that happens, it is pretty devastating, but tough. You decided to build a list that lent into it. If you don't want to risk miscasts, well, go for dwarves or, Khorne or something. character, we talked about that. Large unit blocking line of sight. Line of sight blocking in the old world relies on abstract base size rules, often unclear in dense tables. I don't think we have issues with line of sight per se. I do think we need to clarify what being in cover means. So at the moment, if you just put like the toe of a unit into a bit of cover, then that unit is partially obscured, even though literally somebody's just stuck their leg behind a bush. That feels very tournament rulesy, and I don't like it. We also seem to have a thing where if most of the shooting unit can see most of the models in a unit unencumbered, we don't class that as being partially obscured, although rules as written you should. And there seems to be a lot of common sense style rulings on any table. I think the rules themselves need to clear up what that means, and I think they should just change the rules so that being partially obscured means at least half, but not all, the models are in some form of cover, and being obscured, fully obscured, means the whole unit being in cover. So you need to be over half of your unit needs to be in a wood to get -1 to hit. Regardless of, yes, there might be 3 models on either side that can see each other, but that's the unit that's obscured, not the models. And then if the unit is wholly in, then i.e. all of the models that could be targeted can only be seen through the wood, then that's fully obscured and they're -2 to hit. I do also think that being behind a low linear obstacle should also give you fully obscured, which it does, but I think it should also give you... actually, no, I was going to say it should give you +1 to your armor save, but actually, no, I don't really believe that. No, that was something my subconscious proffered as I was saying that sentence, and swiftly rejected. I don't think so at all. But yeah, line of sight is a bit of a problem. Yes, trees can block monsters. Oh, but I can see over those woods. Yeah, it can crouch. Like, on a battlefield, you hide behind things. Low stumps, cars. Cars aren't great, actually, because bullets go through cars. But anyway, you hide behind things on a battlefield. It absolutely makes sense that a dragon would hide behind a wood if faced with cannons. Cannons. Targeting. I think those rules need to be made much more clear, and I think basically we need to sort out the cannon targeting rule. It should target the centre of a unit, the central model of a unit, like the standard bearer, or just the champion if there is a command, or just the central model. You first roll an artillery dice. If it's a misfire, you roll on the misfire table. If it isn't, then the cannon shoots as usual, and then you roll the artillery dice again, and if it's a misfire, it hits 1 model, and if it's any other result, it goes through that number of ranks. I think is the way to play cannons, which would solve their targeting rules, would make them a bit more boring, but means that you can't snipe with cannons anymore, and I think that would be a good upgrade. I think cannons also need to do way more damage. So I'd like to see a great cannon doing, like, I don't know, 2d3, and a normal cannon doing d3 plus 1. I think that would be good. Ambushers, often guaranteed board edge arrival with no risk, low counterplay, except zone deniable. Yeah, I'm fine with that. Ambushers, I think, at the moment is a bit of a player trap, because there's loads of units where you can use the ambush rules, but you actually really don't want to. Because it means the unit's off the table, and they don't arrive reliably. And yeah, there's no counterplay. That's fine. You've been ambushed. Tough shit. Deal with it. It's not like the units that you can ambush with are actually really, super, super good in general. They're normally like light skirmisher units. You get the occasional monster, but, if somebody's... So, right, if you've got let's say you've got a Chaos Knight heavy army, if somebody's put some stuff in ambushes, you just go, great, that's less points on the table to begin with, I'll just kill what's on the table, and then they're attacking me in waves, brilliant. I'll just pick them off one wave at a time. And that's pretty much the response to anybody who's got ambushes. Like, oh, okay, they've got ambushes, they're going to attack me in waves, so I'm going to stick my war machines in the corner, I'm going to stick a unit near them that can defend them, and then the rest of my army is going to sort of castle up around that. That's how I'm going to counteract the ambushes. There's an easy, there is counterplay. I don't get that comment that there isn't. Shooting into combat. Should we be able to shoot into combat? You can in Warhammer Total War. Should we be able to shoot into combat? I mean, we never have been able to. I think Skaven used to be able to, didn't they? And was that only with Skaven slaves? I can't remember. There have been, I think, in history, some factions that can shoot into combat, and it's always been a 50-50 kind of, you hit yours on a 1 to 3 and you hit theirs on a 4+. I mean, I'd make it a 5+ 1 to 4 sort of thing, if you're going to do it. If you're going to do it, it needs to be like -1 to hit, and then you hit your own guys on a 1 or a 2. Maybe a hit, if the hit roll is 1 or a 2, you've hit your own. No. I guess it is a little bit easier to hit a static melee. But then again, actually, they don't rank up. Like I said, you form a shield wall, and that gets quite tight and concentrated. So it would be quite difficult. But then again, you could shoot the side and the rear. So I guess it depends, really, doesn't it? It depends what... Because if I was an archer and there was a shield wall there, there was an enemy shield wall fighting that way, I could quite... I could quite happily shoot... Well, my entire quiver and be pretty certain I'm going to hit one of their guys every time because they're so clumped up. Probably the same from a flank as well. But from a front, probably not. So maybe shooting into combat, if you're in the rear or flank arc of the enemy unit when shooting, and if you roll a 1 to hit, you accidentally hit your own guys. I think would be a cool rule and would kind of be a bit more realistic because people did shoot into combat in history. But absolutely not from your guy's side because you're just going to hit your own troops. So, yeah, I think shooting into combat, they won't do it, I don't think, but I think they should. Break tests and insane courage. Failing one break can decide games. Insane courage can turn major losses into swings. Yeah, I'm fine with that. I've lost games because of a few panic tests before. Like I went to a tournament maybe last year or maybe the year before. I took ogres and literally on one game half my army fled off the table. One unit broke, it panicked 2 others, and they all ran off. And that was like my general big unit of Mournfangs and 6 ogres, which it was a 1750 point tournament. And I think I worked out that was about 900,000 points. Just ran off on one turn. Basically, just because his unit had a musician that managed to tie break a combat, and then half my army ran off. It's really painful, but I'm okay with that. That kind of stuff happens. Cortex. Some people don't like the Cortex in that you've got to buy potentially with a lot of factions. Actually, you've got to buy potentially rubbish units, which is essentially a form of Cortex, so you can't build your maximally operationalized army. Maximally operationalized, that's not the right. Maximally optimized army. I mean, so what is that core mechanic trying to do? It's trying to make your army look like a certain thing. So, for instance, in Heralds of Darkness, you've got to have 660 points. You've got cavalry as your options, pretty much. So, it's telling you that this is a cavalry force. I really don't know whether I'm okay with the core thing or not. Like, if you get rid of core, you end up with something like 40k and Age of Sigmar, where people take whatever units they like and build an army with whatever, and then every single unit needs to be balanced externally. Whereas with a core tax concept, actually, that's more about internal balance. And actually, you do want your core stuff to be kind of the worst thing in the book. They're like your levies or whatever. They're supposed to be pretty rubbish troops that you've just got to take. I genuinely don't know where I sit on the whole core special rare thing. I quite like it as like a mechanic, but like I said, you can already do that by saying 0 to 1 per 1,000 points or 0 to 2 per 1,000 points or whatever. So rather than having core special rare, you could have that kind of selection dilemma on every single unit and then balance every unit externally rather than internally, for instance. So what they're supposed to do really is change the internal balance of a faction, or balance a faction internally, such that the core stuff is the worst stuff and rare stuff is the best stuff and special stuff is kind of in between the core and the rare. Now, that doesn't actually work for most factions because sometimes the core stuff is the best thing in the list. So I don't have a problem with the core mechanic. What I guess I have a problem with is that some factions' core choices are really good and some aren't. Some you do actually want to choose and some you don't. I really, really detest having 1+ of anything in your core selection. Most of the time, I quite like the Nuln State Troop 1+. I say I really detest. I don't really detest it. I've overblown my preference there. I don't really detest it. It feels a bit incongruent, really. Like, I know why they've done it with Nuln, because people would just spam Outriders if they could, but they've got to take a unit of state troops. The problem is that unit of state troops doesn't have to be very big, so you can take a unit of state troops and, it's just not. It's just a points tax. So I guess what they've got to do is they've got to make the concept of core something that thematically builds a list around some kind of visual aspect, rather than it just being a tax. You want players to want to take those units because they fulfill a vital role on the battlefield. So yeah, I mean it's difficult to balance. I don't know what I think about that, to be honest. Comments down below. What do you think? Stand and shoot. Some people have a problem with Empire handgunners or dwarf quarrelers firing in 2 ranks on stand and shoot. Double firing gun lines can be very punishing, apparently. I mean, like I said, shooting is already pretty strong. Point for point, your shooting unit can defeat an infantry unit. Your cavalry unit. See, okay, so this is how the game balance should work. Artillery, as in any kind of shooting, but ranged weapons should be infantry every time. Infantry should be cavalry pretty much every time. Cavalry should be ranged units every time, because cavalry get into ranged units. In fact, that's what Swift Stride could be, couldn't it? Like, you don't get stand and shoot against them. They charge as normal, So it's move plus d6, so it makes them less quick across the table. But yeah, that's potentially, or maybe first charge. You don't get your stand and shoot against their first charge, maybe. Rather than it being a rank negator. Yeah, I think that would work actually. Make infantry better against cavalry. Make cavalry turn off stand and shoot every now and again. That makes sense. But yeah, stand and shoot can be absolutely devastating, and it shouldn't be, because it didn't really happen in reality. Like normally, you're like, if a unit of knights was charging down a unit of bowmen, the bowmen would be legging it. Like, you wouldn't even get into combat, just run away, get into some woods, get cover, hope for the best. Monstrous units, strong but hard to balance. Ogres, trolls, etc. are often point sufficient, apparently, especially with regen, stomp combos. I don't have a problem with monstrous infantry at the moment. I think they're all fine. Skirmishes we talked about. Challenge rules. Now, the challenge rules, there is this post here on Reddit, which I think is quite interesting. It's, again, a year old, so it's pretty much been answered already. But you charge, I think... Anyway, I'll just go through the questions. I think it's quite interesting. Can a defender issue a challenge on the first one? It doesn't actually... So what this is saying is, like, if I charge a unit of Grail Knights into my enemy, and I charge a unit of Grail Knights into, a dragon with a character on, a ridden dragon with a character on. Now, because it's a unit of Grail Knights, every single turn that ridden character with a dragon on can issue a challenge, and somebody from the Grail Knight unit has to accept, because I think Grail Knights have to accept challenges. So every single turn, this massive dragon can curb stomp one after the other of these Grail Knights as they go up one at a time to fight it. Now, thematically, I don't have any problem with that, because that kind of makes a bit of sense. Oh, no, they don't have Grail Knights. Have I actually got a normal? So the question is, how do we get it so that we can turn down challenges without it being a massive problem? Because the Grail Knights have... Every model in a unit of Grail Knights can issue and accept challenges in the same manner as a character. Now, I think with this type of... I think really the issue here just needs the conditionality of this clearing up a little bit. So, for instance, the champion is the only one that must accept a challenge. With the Living Saints rule, and the same with the Blood Knights, they've got a similar rule. But if they can choose to step up and become a champion for the purposes of accepting or denying challenges. So that means you can essentially not become a challenge taker, and therefore the whole unit gets to fight without losing. But then again, like, it is such a... I mean, I would say that, but then again, it is such a niche scenario, like Grail Knights. But if you've got a unit of Grail Knights, just don't charge them into a dragon. Like, charge them into something else, like, a bit of artillery. I mean, they're cavalry. They're not there to kill monsters. I guess in desperate circumstances you have to, and it's a bit of a negative play experience, but still. Yeah. I'm not so sure about the challenge rules. I think they're fine. The issue that I really have is that, you charge your massive dragon into a unit of, like, skeleton spears. One skeleton spearman stands out in front of the skeleton spears and says, direct all of your fury at me. And you then have to, for some reason. You can't just say, no, you're beneath me, I'm not going to challenge you at all, and I'm going to womp on this unit, thank you very much. Which there should be, I think, there should be a way of doing that. like you've got to represent a challenge in order to issue one, right? And if you don't represent a challenge, then the person challenged is just going to ignore you. So, yeah, I don't know. And then also, you don't get the unit to attack, the dragon, which is just this massive thing that everybody's just sort of holding off hitting because it's womping on a champion in front of the... I mean, arguably, one thing that they probably could do is just get rid of challenges. They are complicated. They add to the rules bloat. They don't really add anything. Because you can, like... I mean, if they did that, they could change the, like, move your characters through the fighting rank rule. Because at the moment, if you're in the fighting rank, you can't move. You can't move through the ranks. You've got to stay where you are. I think they should change that. So essentially, you could set up, like, loads of mini challenges every single combat. And you do that as players by moving your characters around. Maybe the player whose turn it is gets to move their characters in the fighting rank, and the player whose turn it doesn't. So they can essentially pick and choose who their characters are facing off against. I don't know. They need to do something with that, and I think there is. I can't think of the rule myself, but I think there is a. Like I said, there is a possible mechanic where you can set up like loads of these things and then like have a really characterful, flavorful combat. So I think there are answers to that, but I can't really. Because, I mean, ideally, moving stuff around in the fighting rank would be the answer, but it's like, who does that and where does it end? So, for instance, if you say the player whose turn it is goes first, they're going to move their characters around. But it doesn't matter where they put theirs, because it's the person who goes second who gets to choose who fights what, doesn't it? So, I don't know. Maybe the player whose turn it is gets to move all of their characters, but the player whose turn it isn't gets to move one of theirs, for instance. Something like that. And factions like Skaven can move their characters to the back of the unit, for instance. But, yeah. The other problem that we've got at the moment, I guess, is the legacy factions. It would be interesting to see which ones they actually do. Or which ones they announce. Chaos Dwarves are the obvious one because they've got all the models, they've got all the molds. They all still work, as far as I understand it. Apparently, somebody put in the other video that Cathay is leaked to be due late June, early July. We're going to see the whole range out, which will be, I think that's quite an interesting timescale. I assumed it was going to be for Christmas, so June, July is a bit weird. Games Workshop do have more sales throughout summer because it's summer holidays, so getting them out before the kids go on summer holidays makes a lot of sense. I think with Cathay, they're trying to break into China and trying to get Warhammer across to that place in the world, and to anybody who does live over there. And I do actually have a few subscribers from. I think I've got one chap in Singapore, and there's another chap in China somewhere. But to those guys, spread the word, because it's a great hobby, and it would be lovely to get more people from different cultures and different backgrounds involved, because that's how we get new interesting factions like Cathay. I'd love them to do the Peoples of Ind in Warhammer 3 Total War. They won't. Creative Assembly have pretty much said that they're ignoring. Oh no, I didn't want that. I wanted the map. Oh, I wanted the map. Yeah, so basically where the bits of the map that are now drawn out, as you can... Oh, no. Oh, no. I just want to see... open image in new... Oh, why is open image... There it is. Idiot. Right. So, I mean, this is the current... well, it's the old world map as well, but I mean, it's Warhammer 3. It's not the old world map because it's near end times, isn't it? But essentially, here you've got Ind, and I forget what that is. It's basically India, and whatever. Anyway, this area is where Cathay is here, and then you've got Ind and Kush or something there. And there's no Araby faction as well. I'd love it if we had like proper Araby, proper Ind, and we got all of this map like, painted out. I mean, I'm not going to comment on Warhammer 3 on Warhammer Total War. I think they need to turn the globe into an actual globe. Having this kind of 2D map, works quite well when you're looking at a small part of like a planet, but like when you're looking at an entire planet, like they have tried to do here, it just doesn't really work, and it introduces weird effects. So like, if you've got a boat here, if you've got a fleet here, it can't go here. There is like a little crossing point, but you can turn off these crossing points, and like the AI can't use the crossing points either. So they're pretty much secret like passages for you to use. There's one from like here to, where does it go? Here, I think, that for no reason. I mean, there is a river that goes all that way, but anyway, I think it's whatever. So I'd love to see them flesh that out, and I think if we get like Warhammer to penetrate different parts of the globe, I mean, this is part of the reason why they're doing Cathay and why Creative Assembly's so excited, or was so excited about Warhammer 3. I mean, they botched the launch, but anyway, because they've got Cathay, and actually once they published the Cathay faction, they found that a lot of people from essentially China and that kind of region of the planet started to pick it up because they had their kind of fantastical history, their sort of a quasi history portrayed on. So I'd love there to be more cultures here, to add more variety to Warhammer. Like, I really want to see Kislev being released, because the old models are rubbish. So I'd love to see them like getting reimagined and revisited, and like, modern sculpting techniques and winged lancers. I bet they'll be absolutely insanely sexy. So I can't wait for. I really hope they do Kislev justice, and I want to see more variety in terms of like, not massive factions with 3 million units available, but I want to see like factions that can build like a complete army, but different factions with slightly different rules, and that adds to the flavour a little bit. So there's just more variety, so it's more interesting. I'd rather there were more factions than more sub-factions, to be honest, but that's and I'm glad actually they've only gone for 2 sub-factions per big faction. I think that's quite good. It means that you've still got a bit of character without bloat. But I imagine it will get bloated over time. So imagine once they've done this and they go through, like, maybe Cathay, maybe Kislev, maybe they start to re-release some of the unsupported factions, as it were, the archive factions, or whatever you want to call those. Once they start to go through those, then they'll start to do more arcane journals and release more sub-factions, and then it'll get stupidly complicated. But it's already pretty complicated as it is. But anyway, yeah, I want more variety. So promote the hell out of it over there if you are. Cool. So that's my take on where the rules are at the moment. Like I said, there were a few leaks, and they said they're going to do something to fix infantry. They said they're going to do, when they drop the new, not General's Handbook, the Match Play Companion, I think they're calling it, or something like that. When they drop that, they're going to do some more rules. So yeah, like I said, they said they're going to do something about infantry. We shall see what that is. Do you know what, actually? Maybe just more rank bonus. Maybe you get +2 per rank instead of 1. Maybe that'd work. And then do something about... But I mean, first charge, there is counterplay to that, because you can use your scouts and skirmishes and stuff to essentially soak up that first charge, so they don't get that bonus in the second one. But I'd much rather first charge applied to something like stand and shoot than it did to... I want to see some big changes to the rules, to be honest. I want to see some, like, substantial... I want the game to change significantly and for the better, because there are some pretty... Well, when I say substantially, it is relatively minor whether, you know, cavalry get stand and shoot against them or not, realistically. And I do think shooting and magic heavy armies are a little bit too powerful at the moment, because it takes so long to close the gap for infantry, not for cavalry, of course. So it's like if you've got a shooting heavy army, you come up against a cavalry heavy army, you lose. Whereas if you have a shooting heavy army, you come up against an infantry heavy army, you win. So I guess like there is an element of rock paper scissors about it as well. Yeah, they're not gonna enforce, like, they did say that they're going to do something around army building in general. So for match play, which I think is quite interesting. So I can't wait to see what that is, to be honest. I hope they make army selection a bit more interesting than just putting limits on things. But I hope they don't go to like 40k AOS style, you know, detachment rules. One of the other things they said is they're going to bring out secret objectives and other objectives, which I did talk about in my other video, but I'm so excited about secret objectives. Like, I love like having a hidden agenda when I'm playing a game. Absolutely brilliant. It's a lot of fun. So it's also a lot of fun trying to work out what your opponent's is as well. But yeah, that's the vid. So yeah, if you're still watching, you probably should subscribe, I'd imagine, because, you know, we're an hour and a half in. And I'd love to get over 1,000, purely selfishly. You know, do if you like or not. I mean, I don't really care. Like the video if you've liked the video, obviously, and I'll see you at the next one, I guess. Toodaloo.